Easy there, boy. You
Oh
feeling good today?
my
That's it. Let's
God.
get moving. Whoa, faster now.
The auction yard smelled like fear and failure. Not the fear of the animals, though they had plenty of that, but the fear of the people who had come to sell. Men and women who had run out of options. Men and women who were saying goodbye to something that had meant everything to them. Marcus Webb stood at the fence watching a horse collapse, and nobody moved. Not one person moved. They just watched. Like watching a horse fall down was just another part of the show. Marcus was 58 years old, and he looked 70. The sun had burned his face brown and deep. His hands had calluses on top of calluses. His back bent a little when he stood still too long. But it was his eyes that told the real story. His eyes looked like someone who had been fighting his whole life and was finally getting tired of fighting. Someone who had woken up one morning and realized that maybe fighting was not going to be enough anymore. The horse that collapsed was a beautiful Arabian mare. You could see it even in her broken state. Arabians have something different about them, something that lives in their bones and their eyes. Even when they are hurt and hungry, there is something noble about them. This mare was chestnut-colored, but her coat was not shiny. It was dull, dusty, like someone had covered her in ash. Her ribs showed through her skin so badly that you could count them from 10 feet away. When she tried to stand up after falling, her legs shook so hard that Marcus wondered if they would hold her. Her name was Sarai. The auctioneer said her name like he was reading off a grocery list. Sarai, Arabian mare, 5 years old. Difficulty handling. That was everything. Difficulty handling, which meant she was scared of people, which meant someone had done something to her that made her afraid, which meant she was already being sold as a problem before anybody even tried to buy her. Marcus had a choice to make. He could walk away. He should walk away. That was what Sarah, his daughter, would tell him to do. That was what any smart person would do. He had money problems. Serious money problems. The kind of money problems that kept him awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling of his ranch house, wondering if the bank would take his land. The kind of money problems that made him skip meals so there would be more money for the horses he already had. The kind of money problems that made it crazy to spend $3,000 on a horse that nobody else wanted. But Marcus had never been accused of being smart. He had been accused of other things. Stubborn, dreamer, man who never learned, man who loved horses more than people, man who should have sold his ranch 20 years ago and saved himself the heartache. His ex-wife had said all of those things before she left. His bank manager had probably said them too, though not to his face. The universe seemed very interested in making sure Marcus understood that his way of doing things did not work in the modern world. The universe seemed very interested in teaching him failure. The Texas sun was turning the auction yard into a furnace. It was 3 p.m, and the heat was the kind that made you understand why people went crazy in the desert. The dust was so thick that you could see it floating in the air like ghosts. When horses moved in the pens, they moved slowly, like they were moving through water instead of air. When people moved, they moved like they were wearing 100 pounds of weight on their shoulders, because they were carrying the weight of their own bad decisions and bad luck and bad timing. That was what auction yards were made of. Bad luck and decisions nobody wanted to make. The horse breeder next to Marcus shook his head. "That one is damaged," he said. "You can see it in her eyes. Horse like that we'll never trust again. Better off buying something fresh, something young that does not have all the problems." He moved away to look at the next pen, the next horse, the next possibility. He left Marcus standing there, looking at Sarai, who was now standing very still in the corner of her pen. Not standing strong. Standing like she was trying to disappear. Marcus could read horses better than he could read people. This was something he had always known about himself. When he looked at a horse, he could see what had happened to them. He could see the places where pain lived. He could see the places where fear had made a home. Looking at Sarai, he saw a horse who had learned that humans were dangerous. She had learned this over and over again. Probably each time someone had taught her, her fear had grown bigger. Now she was scared of men. Scared of hands. Scared of sudden movements. Scared of almost everything because almost everything had taught her to be scared. Most people would have walked away. Smart people would have walked away. Marcus raised his hand when the auctioneer called Sarai's name the second time. The bidding was almost funny. One other person bid against him, half-heartedly, like they were not even sure they wanted to buy a horse. They were just making a bid because that was what you did at auctions. Marcus bid higher. The other person stopped bidding. The auctioneer looked surprised. Nobody wanted to pay $3,000 for a horse that could not be ridden, could not be trained, could not do anything useful. But Marcus did. When the hammer fell, it was like the sound of something breaking inside him. The best kind of breaking. The kind that means you have finally made a real decision. He walked over to her pen after the auction was finished. All the other buyers had left to handle paperwork or make arrangements. The auction yard was getting quiet. The sun was getting lower. Sarai was standing in her corner, and she did not move when Marcus approached. She did not run. She did not buck. She just pressed herself further back into the corner, trying to take up less space in the world, trying to disappear from the danger.
Marcus did not try to touch her. He just stood there. He looked at her the way you look at something you might have just made the biggest mistake of your life buying. But he also looked at her the way you look at something that might be the most important decision you ever make. Those two feelings were happening at the same time, and Marcus let them both live inside his chest. "We're going to figure this out," he said to her in a quiet voice. "I do not know how, but we will figure it out." The horse did not believe him. That was okay. Marcus did not fully believe himself either. He just knew that this horse had nowhere else to go, and he knew that he had nothing else left to lose. And sometimes when two things like that come together, something unexpected happens. Sometimes something that looked like a mistake turns into the most important thing that ever happened to you. He loaded her into his trailer as the sun was turning orange. She was shaking. She was scared, but she moved when he asked her to move. She did not fight or panic. She just did what he asked because she had learned that fighting did not help. When you have been broken enough times, you stop fighting. Marcus did not know it yet, but he had just brought home the thing that would change his entire life. He did not know it yet, but Sarai was going to teach him something that no person had ever been able to teach him. She was going to teach him that broken does not mean impossible. Broken just means you need someone patient enough to sit with you while you learn to trust again. The drive back to his ranch took 2 hours. Marcus drove slowly. Behind him, the horse he had just bought was alone in the trailer, probably shaking, probably terrified, probably wondering why the universe had brought her to yet another person, yet another place, yet another chance to be disappointed. He did not know that this was not a disappointment waiting to happen. He did not know that this was the beginning of everything changing. The morning came too early, like all ranch mornings do. 4:30 in the morning. Dark outside. So dark that you could not see your own hand in front of your face. Marcus Webb woke up because his body was trained to wake up. 58 years of waking up before the sun had turned his body into a clock that did not need an alarm. His knees hurt when he stood up. His back hurt when he bent down to put on his boots. His heart hurt in a way that doctors could not explain, even when they tried. He drank 2 cups of strong coffee, standing at the kitchen sink. The coffee was cold by the time he was done drinking it, but that was okay. Cold coffee was still coffee. Cold coffee still woke you up and pushed you toward the day. He stood there in his ranch kitchen, looking out the window at the darkness, thinking about all the ways he had failed. The failed marriage, the failed investments, the failed business decisions, the ranch that was supposed to make him money, but instead only took money. The horses he had trained that nobody wanted to buy. The life that looked nothing like what he had imagined when he was young. Then he remembered Sarai, the horse he had brought home yesterday. The horse that was probably scared and alone in the barn right now. Probably wondering what new nightmare had come for her. He walked down to the barn in the dark, using a flashlight that was barely bright enough to see where his feet were going. The barn was cold in the early morning. Colder than the house. Colder than anywhere should be. When he opened the door to Sarai's stall, she was standing exactly where he had left her the night before, in the corner, as far from the door as she could get. She had not moved all night. He knew this because the hay he had put down was still there, untouched. The water was untouched. She had just stood in that corner for hours and hours, waiting for something bad to happen. Marcus stood very still. He did not move toward her. He did not speak to her. He just turned on the stall light and looked at what he had bought. In the light, Sarai looked worse than she had looked at the auction yard. You could count every single rib. You could see the bones in her hips. Her coat was dull and matted. There were scars on her legs. There were marks on her neck where ropes had been tied too tight. There was a scar on her face that looked like someone had hit her with something sharp. This was not just a horse that had been neglected. This was a horse that had been hurt. Really hurt. The kind of hurt that lives inside you after people stop hitting you. Sarah appeared in the barn doorway. She was wearing her work clothes, and her face looked like someone who had not slept very well. She was 42 years old, and she looked tired in the way that daughters look tired when they are watching their fathers make choices that are going to hurt them. She had warned him about buying a horse. She had told him the ranch could not afford another mouth to feed. She had explained, in detail, about money and bills and responsibility. He had not listened. Fathers and daughters have this conversation over and over, and it never goes the way anybody wants it to. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Marcus did not answer her right away. He just kept looking at Sarai. The horse was looking back at him, but not with her eyes. With her whole body. Every muscle was tight. Every line was afraid. This horse was telling him, without using any words, that she did not believe anything good was going to happen. She had probably believed that once. She had probably been a young horse who believed that life could be normal and safe. But that horse was gone. What stood in front of Marcus now was a horse who had learned that belief was dangerous, that hope was dangerous, that trusting anything was the fastest way to get hurt again. "I do not know yet," Marcus said finally, "but I'm going to sit with her." He moved to the center of the stall and sat down on an old bucket that had been sitting in the corner for years. The bucket creaked under his weight. Sarai flinched when it creaked. She thought the sound meant something bad. She had learned to be afraid of sounds, of movements, of anything unexpected. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her father sit on a bucket in a stall with a horse that was terrified. She wanted to tell him this was crazy. She wanted to tell him that some things cannot be fixed. She wanted to tell him that trying to save a broken horse was not going to help him if the ranch went out of business. She wanted to tell him all of these things. Instead, she turned around and walked back to the house. For the next 3 hours, Marcus sat on that bucket. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not try to touch the horse or make eye contact. He just sat there. The sun came up slowly, turning the darkness into gray, then turning the gray into light. The light came through the barn windows and made everything visible. The dust floating in the air. The old tractor that had not worked in 5 years, parked in the corner. The empty feed bag stacked by the wall. The barn that was slowly falling apart, like everything else in Marcus's life. 45 minutes into sitting on the bucket, Sarai moved. It was a small movement, just shifting her weight from one back leg to the other. But it was movement that was not fear-based. It was movement that meant she was thinking. Marcus did not celebrate. He did not move. He just noticed the way you notice when something small changes. By 9 in the morning, Sarai had moved closer to her water trough. She did not drink, but she moved closer. That was something. That was progress. By noon, Marcus was still sitting on the bucket. His knees hurt. His back hurt. His heart was doing something funny in his chest, something that made him dizzy if he stood up too fast. But he stayed. He stayed because he had learned something a long time ago, something that no person had ever understood about him. That sometimes the only way to fix something is to not try to fix it. Sometimes the only way to help is to show up and stay. Just stay. Just be present without asking for anything in return. Sarah came to the barn at lunchtime. She brought him a sandwich and water. She looked at her father sitting on a bucket, and she looked at the horse in the corner, and she did not say anything. What was there to say? Her father was a man who had spent his whole life trying to help things. A man who could not stop helping things even when it was going to hurt him. She left the sandwich on a hay bale and walked back out. Around 3 in the afternoon, Sarai did something that had never happened before in her entire life with Marcus. She walked forward, not away from him, forward, toward the hay that was on the other side of the bucket where he was sitting. She had to get very close to him to reach it. He could have grabbed her. He could have tried to touch her. Instead, he did nothing. He sat very still. He let her get close to him without punishing her for it, without touching her without making it mean anything except what it was, a horse deciding that maybe, just maybe, this one was different. When evening came, Marcus finally stood up. His legs barely worked. His whole body was stiff. But as he stood, Sarai did not run to the corner. She watched him. She was still afraid, but the fear was different now. It was smaller. It was a fear that had started to make room for something else. That night, for the first time, Sarai ate some of the hay. It was not much. It was barely anything. But it was the first time since she had come to the ranch that she had eaten. It was the first sign that something inside her, some small part that had not been completely broken, was willing to try again. Marcus fell asleep that night thinking about how sometimes the biggest change starts with the smallest choice. The choice to sit on a bucket. The choice to stay. The choice to not give up, even when giving up would be easier. He did not know it yet, but this one day, this one bucket, this one horse was going to change everything about who he was and who he was going to become. 6 weeks had passed since Marcus brought Sarai to the ranch. 6 weeks of sitting on buckets. 6 weeks of watching a horse learn that maybe, just maybe, humans could be different. 6 weeks of progress that felt like miracles because progress with a broken horse always feels like miracles. Sarai was eating now. She was drinking water. She was letting Marcus stand near her without running to the corner. Sometimes she even let him touch her neck. Just for a second. Just long enough to know that his hand was gentle. This was the kind of progress that made Marcus believe in second chances again. But on a Tuesday afternoon in June, everything changed. Marcus was fixing the fence on the east side of the property, the fence that had been falling apart for 3 years. He was working alone because he always worked alone. That was just how ranch life was. There was always something broken that needed fixing, and there was never enough money to pay someone else to fix it. So you fixed it yourself. You went out to the property where nobody else was, and you worked until the sun went down or your body gave up, whichever came first. He was reaching up to fix the top wire when something went wrong inside his chest. Not wrong like pain. Wrong like a door slamming. Wrong like something breaking that was never supposed to break. Marcus dropped the wire. He dropped his tools. He stood there in the middle of the pasture, 58 years old, with his hand on his chest, realizing that his body was doing something it had never done before. The pain came next. It came like a fist closing around his heart. It came like lightning inside his ribs. It came like nothing he had ever felt in his entire life. Marcus had broken bones. He had been thrown from horses. He had worked through injuries and sickness because that was what ranch people did. You worked through pain. You did not stop. But this pain was different. This pain was saying something that he could not ignore. This pain was saying that maybe his body was not going to do what he wanted it to do anymore. He made it to the truck. He did not know how, but he made it. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely get the key in the ignition. The truck started on the third try. His vision was getting blurry. His left arm felt like it was not connected to his body anymore. He knew what this was. He had heard people talk about it his whole life. Heart attack. That was what happened to men who worked too hard and stressed too much. That was what happened to men who ran their bodies into the ground. The drive to town was the longest drive of his life. 20 miles to the hospital. 20 miles with his hand on his chest. 20 miles wondering if he was going to make it. 20 miles wondering if this was how he was going to die. Alone in a truck on a Texas highway, far from the ranch, far from his daughter, far from the horse that had just started to trust him again. He made it to the hospital. The emergency room was full of people. Sick people. Hurt people. People waiting for answers. They put him on a stretcher. They attached machines to his chest. They gave him medications. They told him to relax, which was the most impossible thing anybody had ever asked him to do. How could he relax when his heart was betraying him? How could he relax when everything was falling apart? How could he relax when he was lying in a hospital bed, alone, far from home? Sarah came to the hospital 4 hours later. She came running into his room like she was still 8 years old, like her father was still the man who could fix anything. She stopped when she saw him hooked up to machines. She stopped when she saw that something had actually broken her father. She sat down beside his bed and cried without making any noise, just tears running down her face while she held his hand. "You have to sell the ranch," she said quietly. "You have to rest. You have to stop doing this. Marcus did not answer. He could not answer. The doctors were telling him the same thing. Rest. Recovery. No heavy work. No stress. The kind of advice that made sense for people who did not have a ranch falling apart. The kind of advice that made sense for people who had options. They kept him in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days of tests and medications and conversations about diet and exercise and stress management. 3 days of lying in a hospital bed, knowing that his property was not being maintained, that his animals needed him, that everything he had built was sitting idle while he was in here, unable to move. 3 days of thinking about Sarai. He did not know what was happening at the ranch. He did not know if she was okay. He did not know if she was scared without him there. He did not know if the progress they had made was disappearing while he was in this hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped at random times. On the morning they released him, Sarah drove him home. He should have gone to her house to rest. The doctor had said to go somewhere quiet, somewhere where he could rest. But Marcus asked Sarah to drive him to the ranch. She wanted to argue, but there was something in his voice that made her just drive. They pulled up to the property in the late afternoon. The sun was getting lower. The light was turning golden and soft. Marcus walked slowly down to the barn. His body was weak. His chest was still tender. But he needed to see her. He needed to know if the horse was okay. What he found stopped him in the doorway. Sarai was standing at the gate of her stall, facing the direction that Marcus always came from. She was looking toward the door, waiting. When she saw him, she did something that she had never done before in her entire life with Marcus. She called out, a soft sound, not a scream, not a panic whinny, just a soft call. The sound of a horse that had been waiting for someone specific. The sound of a horse that had learned to hope for someone specific. The sound of a horse that had decided that this one human was worth waiting for. Sarah was standing behind him, tears falling down her face. She did this every single day, Dad, she said quietly. Every evening, around the time you always come to her. She stands at that gate and she calls for you. She has been waiting for you to come home. Marcus could not speak. His eyes were full. His throat was too tight. He opened the gate and Sarai walked to him, not running, not panicking, just walking forward with purpose. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. This horse, this broken horse that nobody else wanted. This horse that had learned to trust again. This horse was telling him something that he needed to hear. She was telling him that somebody needed him, that somebody had been waiting for him, that his life was not over, that the work he had started with her mattered, that the broken things he was trying to fix were actually fixing him back. Marcus stood there in the barn, an old man whose body had just failed him, being held by a horse that had learned to love him. And something shifted, something that had been broken inside him, something deeper than his heart, started to heal. Sarah watched them, and she began to understand what her father had understood from the beginning. Sometimes the thing that costs you everything is the thing that saves you. Sometimes the broken thing you are trying to help is actually the one that is helping you. That night, everything changed again. But this time, it was changing towards something better. After Marcus came home from the hospital, he started asking questions about Sarai. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. He needed to understand what had happened to this horse. He needed to know why she was so broken. He needed to know if there was any hope at all that she could ever be more than just a traumatized animal learning slowly not to be afraid. So he made phone calls. He tracked down the people who had owned her before. He pieced together a story that nobody wanted to tell him because it was a story about failure. A story about people making wrong choices. A story about how even the most beautiful creature could be destroyed by the things humans did to it. Sarai had been born in Colorado on a spring morning 15 years before Marcus met her. Not 15 years. She was only 5 years old now. But she had lived through things that should have taken a lifetime to experience. She had been born at a racing stable called Silva Wind Farm, and she had been born to greatness. That was what her parents' bloodline promised. Champions. Money. Success. Her mother had been a champion racehorse. Her father had sired champions. Sarai was supposed to be a star. The first 3 years of her life, the stable had treated her like she was special. They had fed her expensive grain. They had given her the best hay. They had handled her with care. But they were also watching her, watching to see if she had the temperament for racing, watching to see if she had the speed, watching to see if she had the right personality. This was when people at Silverwind Farm started to see the problem. Sarai was sensitive, too sensitive. When something scared her, she did not become brave. She became more scared. When something startled her, she did not recover quickly. The fear lived in her body for hours. This was not the personality of a champion racehorse. The trainer's name was David Crow, and he had a philosophy about sensitive horses. His philosophy was simple: beat the sensitivity out of them. If a horse is too afraid, make them more afraid, and eventually, they will choose courage over fear. This is what David Crow believed, and this is what he did to Sarai when she was 3 years old. He started with a whip. He would ride her, and if she did not do what he wanted, he would hit her with a whip. Not lightly, not for training purposes, with anger, with the intention of making her understand that fear was worse than obedience. When the whip did not work, he started using spurs. Sharp spurs that dug into her sides. Spurs that left marks. Spurs that made her body learn that pain was constant. That punishment was random. That the only safety was to do exactly what he said, the moment he said it, without hesitation or question. But Sarai's nature was not something that could be beaten out of her. You cannot beat sensitivity out of a sensitive horse. You only make the horse more traumatized. You only teach them that humans are pain. You only destroy the trust that should exist between a horse and a person. By the time Sarai was 4 years old, she had learned that people meant hurt. She had learned that being alive meant being afraid. She had learned that the only safe place was inside herself, where nobody could reach her with a whip or spurs or hands that hurt. When David Crow realized he could not fix Sarai, he did what trainers do. He sold her. He sold her to a private owner in New Mexico named Garrett Hicks, and he told Garrett that the horse was difficult, that she had problems, that she would never be a good riding horse. He did not tell Garrett the truth, that he had broken her, that he had taken a sensitive, beautiful horse and turned her into a traumatized animal, that some things, once broken, are very hard to fix. Garrett Hicks bought Sarai with hope. He was a good man. Actually, he believed in horses. He believed they could be healed. He brought in a trainer who believed in kindness, a woman named Linda who used gentle methods. Linda did everything right. She moved slowly. She spoke softly. She gave Sarai treats and praise. But Sarai did not believe any of it. Sarai had learned that gentle words were lies, that kindness was a trick, that trust was the fastest way to get hurt. So even though Linda was nothing like David Crow, Sarai was too broken to trust her. Garrett kept Sarai for 2 years. For 2 years, he paid the bills and tried different trainers and different approaches. But Sarai was not improving. She was not getting better. She was just existing day after day in a state of constant fear. Finally, Garrett made a decision. Not because he was cruel, but because he was tired. Because he had other horses. Because he could not afford to keep investing in something that was not getting better. He sold Sarai to a family in Santa Fe, a family who thought they could save her. The family had a teenage daughter named Katie. Katie loved horses. She was 16 years old and full of the kind of hope that only teenagers have. Katie was going to be the one who fixed Sarai. Katie was going to show her that humans could be good. Katie was going to heal her with love. But that is not how trauma works. Trauma does not respond to love the way healthy things do. Trauma responds to time, to consistency, to patience that lasts longer than a few weeks. 2 weeks into being with Katie's family, Sarai spooked at something. A plastic bag blowing across the yard. Just a normal thing that horses see every day. But Sarai's fear was not normal anymore. Her fear was huge and consuming and all-powerful. She bolted. She ran as fast as she could, tried to escape the thing that she thought was going to kill her. Katie was on her back when she bolted. Katie was a good rider, but nobody is a good enough rider for a horse that is running from the inside of her own head. Katie was thrown. She landed on her collarbone, and her collarbone broke. The family brought Sarai back to the auction yard the next day. They left a note that said the horse was dangerous, that the horse was unfit for human contact, that the horse should probably be put down. They did not say anything about their own failure to understand what trauma means. They did not say anything about the fact that Sarai had not been dangerous. She had just been terrified. They just returned her and walked away. Another chapter in a story of a horse that nobody could figure out how to save. That was where Marcus found her. At the auction, sold for $3,000 to a man who had nothing left to lose and who somehow understood something that all of these other people did not understand. That broken does not mean impossible. That a horse's past does not have to determine her future. That sometimes all a traumatized being needs is someone patient enough to sit on a bucket and wait. When Marcus learned all of this, when he heard the story of the whips and the spurs and the trainers and the families and the people who had given up, he did not feel despair. He felt something else. He felt anger at what had been done to her. He felt sadness for the years she had lost being afraid. But most of all, he felt something like purpose. He felt like he finally understood why she was waiting for him at the gate, why she had called for him when he was gone, why she needed him. She needed him because he was the first person who had ever just sat with her, just been present with her, just loved her without asking her to be anything different than what she was. And in loving her, Marcus was learning what he had never been able to learn before. That broken things, when treated with enough patience and enough love, could learn to become whole again. 3 years later, the ranch looked completely different. Not the building. The buildings were still the same old barns and fences that had been falling apart. But the land felt different. The air felt different. The whole property felt like it was breathing again, like it had come back to life after a long time of slowly dying. Marcus Webb stood on the porch of his ranch house on a spring afternoon, watching horses in the pastures, and he realized that he had stopped fighting to save the ranch. Instead, he had stopped fighting at all. And somehow, that was what had saved it. The Recovery Ranch. That was what Sarah had named it. Not the Webb Ranch. Not the original family property with its original name. Something new. Something that meant something different. The ranch was no longer trying to be a cattle operation or a traditional horse ranch. It was a sanctuary. A place where broken horses came to learn that healing was possible. A place where broken people came to learn the same thing from the horses. It had started as a crazy idea right after Marcus came home from the hospital. He was sitting on the porch, recovering, barely able to walk from the barn to the house, when Sarah came and sat next to him. She had been doing research. She had been making phone calls. She had been asking questions. And she had figured out that what her father had done with Sarai, what he had done with patience and presence and unconditional love, was something that could be taught, something that could help other people, something that mattered. They had used the remaining equity in the ranch to establish a nonprofit foundation. They had created a program. Horses that were broken or traumatized or considered unusable would come to the Recovery Ranch. People who were broken or traumatized or had lost hope would come to work with those horses. And somehow, the horses would teach the people what they needed to know. Not with words, with presence, with the simple fact of showing up every day and trying again. The first official person to come to the program was a 14-year-old girl named Emma. Emma had spent 6 months in juvenile detention for assault. She had beaten someone up at school, not because she was evil, but because she was angry. Angry at her home situation. Angry at the adults who had failed her. Angry at a world that had taught her that strength and violence were the only languages that worked. Emma was angry the way a young person can be angry, with her whole body, with her whole heart. Sarah brought Emma to Sarai's stall on her first day at the ranch. Emma was wearing the kind of expression that teenagers wear when they do not want to be anywhere. Defensive, closed off, ready for the world to hurt her again. She looked at Sarai the way you look at something that means nothing to you. Just another horse. Just another waste of time. "This is Sarai," Sarah said quietly. She was beaten by trainers. She was sold by people who did not understand her. She was returned by families who gave up. Everyone who had her before decided she was too broken to be worth anything. But she is here now, and your job for the next 3 months is to sit with her, to be with her, to not ask her to be anything except what she is. Emma did not want to do it. Emma wanted to leave. Emma wanted to go back to the group home or juvenile detention or anywhere except a ranch with a broken horse and a woman asking her to feel feelings. But Sarah did not push. She just walked away. She left Emma standing in the barn, looking at Sarai who was looking back at her with the same expression. Two broken things. Two beings that had learned that the world was not safe. Two creatures that did not know how to hope. Over the first week, Emma did nothing. She just went to the barn and sat near Sarai's stall. She did not talk. She did not touch the horse. She just sat. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she was angry. Sometimes she just sat there, empty, the way traumatized people sit when they have run out of emotions to feel. Sarai did not approach her, but she watched her, the way a being that has learned to be cautious watches another being that might also need caution. By the second week, something started to change. It was not anything dramatic. Emma began to brush Sarai's mane. Not because Sarah asked, because Emma wanted to. Because touching something that was also broken felt like maybe she was not alone in being broken. Sarai let her brush, not moving away, not panicking, just standing there, letting another broken thing touch her, the way only broken things can understand. By the third week, Emma was talking to Sarai. Not out loud, not to anybody else, just whispers that only the horse could hear. Sarai was listening, the way horses listen when someone is telling them something true. Emma was telling Sarai about her mother who did not care, about her father who had hit her, about the anger that lived inside her like a second heartbeat. She was telling Sarai things she had never told any person, and Sarai was teaching her something without using any words. Sarai was teaching her that you could be broken and still be valuable, that your past did not have to be your future, that someone could sit with you in your brokenness without trying to fix you. That sometimes the kindest thing another being could do was just show up and stay. 3 months later, when Emma left the ranch, she was not fixed. Healing does not happen that fast. But she was different. She was softer in some places. She was stronger in others. When she walked away from Sarai's stall for the last time, she cried. And Sarai stood still while she cried, offering her the same gift that Marcus had offered, presence without judgment. By the time 3 years had passed, the recovery ranch had helped 73 teenagers. 73 broken young people had come to the ranch and sat with broken horses and learned what the horses had learned. That broken did not mean impossible. That healing was slow and it was hard and it was worth doing. That sometimes the thing that saves you is just someone or something that shows up and stays. 3 of those teenagers had gone on to become equine therapists. They were helping other broken people using the same methods that Marcus had used with Sarai. The ripple was spreading. The healing was continuing. The thing that had started with 1 man and 1 horse was now touching lives in places far away from the Texas ranch. Marcus was 61 years old now. His heart was stronger than it had been in years. The doctors were surprised at his recovery. They did not understand that the best medicine is having something that needs you, having a purpose, having a reason to keep going. Marcus's body was healing because his spirit was healing. And his spirit was healing because every single day he got to do work that mattered. On a spring afternoon, 3 years after bringing Sarai home, Marcus walked down to her pasture. She was grazing in the afternoon sun, doing nothing special, just being a horse in a pasture. She was in her early 30s now. Her body was older, but her spirit was light. She lifted her head when she saw him coming, and she walked to him. Not because he called her, not because he asked her, just because she knew him, just because they belonged to each other now. Marcus stood beside her in the pasture, and she turned and leaned her head against his shoulder. The same way she had done it the night he came home from the hospital. The same way she had done it 1,000 times since. This man and this horse. This broken man and this broken horse. Together in a pasture in Texas. Proof that healing was real. Proof that second chances existed. Proof that the thing nobody wanted could become the most valuable thing you ever had. Sarah watched from the house. She watched her father stand beside the horse, and she understood something that she had fought against for so long. Her father had been right. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth the money and the risk and the heartache. Some things, when you loved them right, loved you back in ways that changed everything about who you were. Marcus stood in the pasture as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He thought about the auction yard. He thought about the horse collapsing. He thought about nobody moving. He thought about the moment he had raised his hand and made a decision that nobody else would have made. He thought about how that one decision had become everything. Sarai pressed her head against his shoulder, and Marcus closed his eyes. He was no longer a failing man on a failing ranch. He was a man who had learned that broken things, when loved right, could become whole. He was a man who had found his purpose in the space between one being's pain and another's willingness to stay. The sun disappeared below the horizon, and the ranch disappeared into darkness. But inside that darkness, something was glowing. Something was healing. Something was proof that the universe was not always cruel, that second chances were real, that the thing nobody wanted could teach everyone everything they needed to know about love. In the darkness of the Texas evening, a man and a horse stood together, and they were not broken anymore. They were broken open. They were open to healing. They were open to hope. They were open to the possibility that the worst moment could become the best moment, and that sometimes the horse nobody wanted was the horse that changed everything.